So sell me on libertarianism. Give me Libertarianism 101.
Well, this is what I say with a broad brushstroke. Libertarians are fiscally responsible and socially liberal. If you look up the definition of a classic liberal, if you Wikipedia classic liberal, I'm a classic liberal.
Right.
And I think most people fall in that category. Right now, there's a website, isidewith.com. In 2012, that was also online, isidewith. And most of the people that took that test aligned with me. And so most people in this country are actually classical liberals. I think they are libertarian, they just don't know it.
So what's actually the difference between classical liberal, because that's really where I would say I'm at right this very moment. I mean, when I was 12, I remember wanting Michael Dukakis to win. I've always thought I was a liberal. And then I sort of went down the progressive route. But now I see sort of less government as a sensible alternative. So what's the difference between classical liberal and libertarian?
I don't know is there's a difference. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think they are, speaking with a broad brushstroke, one and the same. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and classical liberal is actually considered a conservative principle, right?
Yes, I mean, that's how it all started. Right, that's how it all started out. But the conservatives have lost their way, in my opinion, with a social conservative agenda that I think turns a lot of people off, and rightfully so. It doesn't allow people to make their own personal choices, recognize their own personal liberties and freedoms, and of course the responsibility that goes along with that.
Right. So on two of the things that are the easy ones, like gay marriage and recreational or even medicinal marijuana, shouldn't these be easy thing? For you, this is an easy thing, right? Because you want limited government, so it doesn't matter.
Yes, and a woman's right to choose, I mean, throw that in there. Just basic decisions. You as an individual should be the only one. I mean, these are difficult. I don't want to say that marriage equality is a difficult personal choice, but, take abortion, for example. I mean, that's a difficult issue, but who but the woman involved should be making that choice? Right.
So what happened then to the Republican Party that should be for small government and should really be for states' rights? The things that I think you're saying you're for, what happened to them that they got mucked up in these issues that really they should be against?
I don't know, but they certainly have gotten mucked up, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And with regard to Republicans, look, they've always hung their hat on being fiscally conservative. Well, where did that go? I mean, they want to cut spending in social areas, but they want to increase spending when it comes to the military. They are growing government just like Democrats.
So is that the dangerous thing more than anything else? That the one guy who was talking about making government smaller in this entire election cycle was Rand Paul. He didn't even get out of the Iowa caucus.
I agree, and I think that Rand Paul, really, if he wasn't a social conservative, I think there would have been a lot more appeal. I happen to agree with half of everything that Rand Paul has to say,
right?
But when it comes to those social issues, that's where we part ways.
Right, so he just won't absolutely say that he's for gay marriage or for...
He'll say let the states decide that, but personally he would say that no, he's opposed to these issues. Well, personally, I'm not opposed to allowing a person to make these choices, believing in my heart of hearts that these are decisions that only the person involved should be making.
Right, so then does that right there go to how dysfunctional our system is, which probably explains why Bernie and Trump are working, because those are the
So the system right now is the Republican nominee has to cater to 30% of the far right. That's what the Republican nominee is appealing to, 30% far right. The Democrat nominee is appealing to 30% of the far left. When you have 45% of the electorate declaring themselves as independent, what you end up with the two major candidates is a solid 30% representation of the electorate, which is really nuts.
Okay, I'm with you. So your sell job is working so far. I'm fully with you. So what do we do to explain to people? I think people think, when you say to someone you're a libertarian, I think they think you want to dismantle the government. You want people to run around only defending themselves, and roads are going to crumble because the government won't be able to sustain them. They're crumbling anyway, even though the government's involved with them. So what do you do to remove some of the stigma from libertarianism?
Well, I got to serve as governor of New Mexico for 8 years, and guess what? I think things worked a lot better. And in a state that was 2-to-1 Democrat, and having gotten reelected the second time by a bigger margin than the first time.
Yeah. Now you were a Republican though, but you were using a lot of libertarian principles.
Yes, I mean I was always the finger was always pointing at me, saying, "Well, really, he's a libertarian," which I always thought was a real compliment, and I still do to this day, because it's a lot more clear. You know where a libertarian stands when it comes to all the issues. I remember growing up, getting this book on here's where, a very short book on here's where, this is what a libertarian is, and I remember saying, "I'm a libertarian," and this was, I want to say I was 14 or 15 years old. Wow, I'm a libertarian.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I was contemplating running for governor of New Mexico, I showed up at the state libertarian meeting, and it took me about 45 seconds to come to grips with the fact that I would never hold office if I ran as a libertarian.
So what was that about?
Well, just the fact that really disorganized. There aren't many libertarians, but that isn't to say that libertarians aren't principally correct. And libertarianism is really all principle. And yes, less government is better. The biggest issue facing our country right now, I think, is the fact that we continue to spend more money than what we take in. And the ramifications of this at some point is going to be a monetary collapse, and that's going to be ugly. Really, really, really ugly.
Yeah, so I know a ton of my supporters, or a ton of my fans are Bernie supporters. And I like Bernie. I think he's talking about the right things. But you know, this idea that college is free and the rest of this stuff, you would argue that these things simply aren't free and the government probably shouldn't have anything to do with them. Right?
So half of what Bernie says. Wow, right on, spot on.
Right. So that you're talking about campaign finance and things like that.
Well, campaign finance and back to individuals making choices in their own lives, and that there is a corporate America. The crony capitalism is alive and well. I recognize that. Spot on. But then when he starts talking about spending and what government should provide, and a huge, gigantic expansion of government, it's just not possible, Dave. I mean, I'm in the camp that believes that there will be a monetary collapse, and it will be because of inflation, and it'll be a bond market collapse because nobody will be holding on to bonds because inflation will be rising at such a rate that bonds won't be anything that you'll want to hold on to.
Because basically the government is just going to spend and spend and spend and spend,
well,
and it's backed by
nothing, and people then recognize it. And like I say, if you get into hyperinflation, which in my opinion at some point will be the conclusion to all of this, you're not going to hold on to a bond when it may be devaluing at the rate of many percentage points a day. You're just not going to hold on to it.
Yeah, so
that's a bond market collapse.
Right. So is part of the problem then that what you just explained to me, that's sort of lofty stuff to be talking about?
It is. Right? It is. But it is out there also. And how do you make that as simple as possible? A monetary collapse is when the dollars that you have don't buy a thing. So let's try and just define it in reality. You're not going to be able to buy anything at the grocery store because there'll be nothing on the shelves. People will have recognized that you've got to take all the money that you have and buy everything that you possibly can because it's not going to be worth anything tomorrow. Right. That's a monetary collapse that is something that's repeated itself in countries time and time over the history of mankind.
Right. So this is
we're not immune from that.
So that's sort of like what happened in Greece like a year ago, and then everyone rushes to the banks, then the banks don't let people take
happened
money.
In Russia, happened in Zimbabwe. Like I say, this at some point, in my opinion, is going to be the outcome of all this.
So is part of the problem messaging then? Because on one hand, I see Bernie going, here's free college, that's great. Young people go, that free college sounds great. And then you have Trump go, just throwing out this red meat about Muslims or immigration or whatever it is. Like they're just giving easy answers. What you just talked about making government smaller and bonds and our monetary system, that's, we need a better bumper sticker for that kind of stuff, right?
Right, and it doesn't quite fit into a soundbite. It doesn't quite fit into a soundbite, but liberty, freedom, personal responsibility, being
John Stuart Mill, right?
Well, being fiscally conservative, the way that we live our own lives.
I wish I could spend the way the government does. Wouldn't that be sweet?
Well, you would know that
for a little while, right? For a couple of years.
if you never had to pay it back.
Yeah.
If you could get away with that kind of a Ponzi scheme, but you're not going to get away with it. Nor is the government.